Why has it taken so long for you to actually, well, it's not good or bad, the reason why you've finally hooked up with a major for distribution. Why did you hold out for such a long time? Because you've been playing for it since 1980, 1981, basically. And you're from Leeds. I'll say they're from Leeds here because they are. Maybe you can explain about Leeds also and the scene out there.
Well, there isn't a scene. That's one reason we live there. Apart from the fact that we like it, and that's really the sort of place we belong. We certainly don't belong in London. It didn't really make it any harder coming from Leeds. Not necessarily. I think certain people in London don't understand when a band wants to stay 200 miles away. Of course, in Canada, 200 miles isn't a long way, but there's a big difference between living in London if you're a band and living anywhere else.
Well, what's the difference?
Well, the difference is if you live in a provincial town, which is this month's thing, you become instantly famous. If you live in Leeds, it takes you a long time. The reason it's taken us so long to get hooked up with WEA is because we were doing well enough on our own not to let anybody distribute our records except in the way we wanted to, and for the amount of money we felt was necessary in order for us to continue doing our job in the way we want to do it.
You mentioned in your press release about being independent but still retaining a sense of professionalism and not really sort of being considered an amateur, even though a lot of people usually regard an independent group as sort of like an amateur outfit in a sense. With who's distributing your records, Merciful released prior to WA?
In England, the Cartel, and in Canada, they were just exported.
Right.
We distributed records through the Cartel from a base in York, where the people are very good, but it must be said that there are parts of the Cartel which are pretty weak. It's very hard to be a professional independent band when you have to deal with a lot of very amateur people, pressing plants, printers, particularly. One of the very sad things about the independent scene in England was that, for a lot of people, it was an excuse for sheer amateurism. We realized, without having to think much about it, that the way we wanted to develop was unlikely to make us instantly famous. And given that, you've got to be sure to do your job properly. The harder the music is, the more perverse it is that you want to make, the more you've got to accept the consequences. The consequences are you get famous very slowly. That's okay, because it means by the time you are famous, you're very good at what you do, and hopefully we're just about there.
Right.
We'd like to think so.
Right. Can you talk about heavy metal music? What are your feelings about it? I've read in past interviews that you don't take it too... well, you don't make fun of it, really. I mean, it's not as silly as... Maybe it's a misunderstood sort of...
It is grossly misunderstood. The term heavy metal has been grossly adulterated in the last 10 years or so. We have an irreverent love of it. It is irreverent, but it's very loving.
In what way?
It's very important to us. It's very easy to take the piss out of heavy metal, and we do a great deal. We take the piss out of everything. But you can't get up night after night or use as a vehicle for what you have to do, the sort of music that you don't love in a very basic and simple way at the same time as you recognize the ridiculousness of it. That's the great thing about it. Heavy metal is the extreme of music, which you can take any way you like, and preferably every way at the same time.
Just sort of curious if it was a conscious attempt to not hire or include a real drummer within your lineup.
Not really. We've never felt the need for one.
Why? I'm curious.
We now have a very sophisticated machine. And all the excuses well, not excuses, all the reasons we had in the past for saying, yeah, well, drum machines are good, the one we've got maybe doesn't do all the things we'd like it to do, have now evaporated because we now have the machine we want. We have a state-of-the-art drum computer. So we'll see, I think, the result of the album and the album tour should obviate the need for any further questions anybody has about do we need a drummer. It's just the same as people might have said if we were like a 50s band, why the hell don't you have a saxophone? Well, why should we have a saxophone? Why should we have a drummer? It's
totally irrelevant, really, for you.
It is. We don't deliberately have a drum machine as opposed to a drummer. We recognise the need for percussion. But if we had a drummer, we'd only want him to do what the drum machine does anyway, and the drum machine does it a damn sight more reliable.
Yeah. And in a sense, maybe it started off as far as when you were first getting the band together, maybe you were working at home, and you were working with one anyways, and you found that it was a lot easier to work with a drum computer or a drum rhythm machine or whatever.
That's certainly true. There was only 3 of us, and none of us was a drummer, and the personal chemistry of the band's always prevented an extra person joining, especially drummers, who as a breed are monstrous and moronic generally. Also in Leeds, it would have been very hard to get a band off the ground at all if we'd had to rehearse with a drum kit. You can rehearse at any volume you like with a drum machine, and it might not be as much fun as playing really loud, but at least you can get to do it. Even now, the band rehearses in the cellar of one of the members, and we wouldn't be able to do that if we had a drum kit.
Right.
So there are practical advantages, but then I guess they might have been the original reason for having a drum machine, but the practical advantages certainly now are outweighed by the fact that we're very happy with the drum machine, and at the moment we certainly don't see the need for a drummer.
Right.
It does everything a drummer would do. In fact, funnily enough, we're going to do a radio session tomorrow, and for the first time, when I was programming some of the drums for it yesterday, I programmed them in real time, not necessarily on the beat, so there's a little looseness there. Mm-hmm. So maybe they'll be a little less clinical tomorrow than they've been before. I mean, I actually think that we benefit from having the clinicalness of the drum machines we've had before, which would always play on the beat and absolutely reliably. The new one, you can introduce that little bit of leeway if you want, and we'll see how that sounds. It might be interesting. Mm. But the new one, we can do almost anything with it we want. Mm-hmm. People say at gigs, well, you can't be spontaneous with a drum machine. With this one, we can. Okay, we can walk up to it and make it do anything we want. We don't actually get to sit behind a kit and bang things, but we can stand there and hit its knobs and it'll make the same noises. The average home computer in this country, the basic one, costs about 50 quid. This drum machine costs £2,000. It's a very sophisticated computer. It'll do well nigh anything.
What is it, actually?
It's an Oberheim.
That's an Oberheim DMX? Or DMX, yeah.
Yeah, it's a DMX.
Right. Yeah, it's a very nice sound.
Yeah. Well, apart from that, you can put any noise in it you please. If you send your noises to Los Angeles, they'll send you a chip back, and you just slot it in.
You mentioned that you went to tour the States during the summer of 1983. How did an independent band get it together to get out there, to get out to North America for all the way from Leeds?
Firstly, we have a few very good friends with a little bit of clout over there. That means that we have someone putting our records out who's very good at hitting the right people. So although we don't sell any noticeable number of records in the States, well, you can't if you're independent anyway, we're reasonably well known here and there. So we do okay, but it's a consequence of having a few friends.
Yeah, I think I heard last year you were staying in New York for a while. I'm not too sure, because I got confused after a while, because I knew that you were playing some shows around certain parts of the States, but I didn't know if you were British or American, or it was very confusing, because it was like, well, I knew you were British, but a lot of people said you were living over there for a period of time.
Most of that was just to wind the enemy up.
Oh, really? I see. Okay. I was just wondering about that.
But we did spend a lot of time there last year, at the beginning of this year. It's a good place.
Did you enjoy it?
Yeah, great deal.
What part did you like the best?
Nighttime. That's the one most noticeable thing about America, after the scale of the place, is that it's 24 hours. And for people like us, that's pretty useful. It's disgusting the way most towns in this country shut at 10 o'clock in the evening.
11 o'clock, yeah. 10 o'clock, I guess, in some parts.
Earlier. I mean, there's places like Peterborough which never get up at all. I mean, there are plenty of dead towns. There are plenty of dead towns in America too, but the American metropolis is a wonderful thing.
Mm.
And we even like the people.
What's so wonderful about America, though?
Apart from the fact that it's open late.
No, you said it's a wonderful metropolis, and I'm just wondering what you mean by that.
Well, mostly because it's open late. But America's a great place. It's just there's nothing in America which is strange to us because we're bombarded with American culture here all the time anyway. First time we went, everybody was winding us up beforehand with, oh, you'll either love it or you'll hate it. No, it's a really extreme place, but it's just a logical extension of England. England's like an American colony.
You think so?
Yeah.
I would have thought it was the other way around.
Well, I guess it used to be, but I wouldn't say it was now.
Oh, you mean that the British are trying to sort of, with a lot of the hamburger stores opening up downtown in London, all over.
Television, films, all the things that make people behave in the way they do.
Yeah. Do you think this can be said of your musical influences to a certain extent about being American influenced by a lot of your press releases, they mention stuff about the Stooges and Velvet Underground and various things like that. And I'm just wondering if those kind of comparisons or those remarks kind of maybe get on your nerves after a while. It's an excuse for people to categorize the Sisters of Mercy very easily.
Well, given that people have to do that, we don't mind so much if they mention people we like. But those comparisons are no more valid than all the comparisons to old English rock bands. Well, we just have the perspective to realize that those bands were American influences as well.
What were some of the real surprises of the past few years when you've been recording? Some of the tunes that have been real surprising for you that you've never really envisaged going to the studio and having it turn out like the way it did?
By the time we actually began to experiment even in the slightest in the studio, and we had time to experiment even a little bit, we'd already had a chance to record at home with a cassette system. Right. So it wasn't just a question of doing something in rehearsal, and if it works in rehearsal with everybody playing together, then you try it in the studio. We'd also tried stuff which was not live based.
And After Hours is really quite, 94 degrees in 2 o'clock in the morning or something? It's very quite, sounds like it's in the middle of a city or something. Very, very, very hot, very...
44th Street. Yeah. But I shifted it a few blocks down so that I wouldn't actually get pinned down to the actual occurrence which led to that being written.
And that wasn't in the Iroquois Hotel, was it?
Yeah. You can tell, can't you? I mean, there's so much amphetamine in that song.
Yeah.
I mean, to me, that song is pure amphetamine. It's the most amphetamine sort of song ever. It works on a completely different time scale to everything else. It's not the sort of all-out gonzo amphetamine song, although we got a couple of those, but it's one of those sort of tingle, 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 was that a minute or was that an hour songs?
Yeah.
There's a lot of like Cars Hiss By My Window in it as well, which is a very LA song. And the thing which prompted the writing of After Hours is very similar to something in LA which might have prompted the same song, so it's like LA and New York rolled into one.
What's the presentation like live with the Sisters of Mercy when they're playing a concert?
Oh, we got into Smoke recently. They gave us Smoke last time we played New York, and we really got off on it, so we use a lot of Smoke these days. And we had a lighting engineer on the last tour who really knew how to light the stage with Smoke, and we had a great time wandering around in this fog. It was very effective. It was very, very stupid and very silly, but at the same time, it really affected you like Smoke is supposed to affect you in that sort of bozo, gut-wrenching heavy metal way.